Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with your latest financial news from across New Zealand and around the globe. Coming up, the financial crisis facing kiwifruit growers and our largest horticultural export industry. We drill down on the catastrophic costs and ask, what's the future for our $1.3 billion baby? An eyewitness report from one of New Zealand's leading bank economists, up close and personal, about what's really going on in troubled Europe. The latest goss from a leading Kiwi banking light. And driving a hard bargain for your best ever mortgage rates. Competition is fierce. Is it time for consumers to seize the day? Expert advice coming up quick. But first, our struggling kiwifruit industry. Recently, KVH, that's Kiwifruit Vine Health, released a report on the economic impact of PSAV disease on the industry and the rest of the economy. The report by Lincoln University's Agribusiness and Economics Research Unit is a critical heads up for the government, banks, and community leaders. It says PSA will cost the industry between $740 to $880 million over the next 15 years in disease management and lost production, not to mention hundreds of jobs. Half of that will be felt in the next 5 years. And that's assuming all goes well with the new gold kiwifruit variety, G3. If not, the situation is dire, according to the report. Joining us now is Neil Trebilco, president of New Zealand Kiwifruit Growers Incorporated, representing 2,600 kiwifruit growers in 22 regions and districts across the country. Neil, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome, Genevieve.
Now, you yourself are a kiwifruit grower. How has PSAV affected you?
We're fortunate right now, Genevieve, because right now on our orchards we don't have any PSA, or not that we know of. We have orchards on the other side of Tauranga, on north of Tauranga, and also in Katikati, and the PSA to a large extent hasn't affected those orchards, so we're fortunate in that regard. But what it has meant for us is additional costs for us, because we're having to spray sprays that we never had to spray before, and so it has incurred quite a bit of extra cost for us.
Now let's talk about this devastating report. Over the next 5 years, it says the kiwifruit disease will cost your industry between $310 million and $410 million. What's your response to the report?
I've talked to some growers about that, and some growers are saying they think it's more than that. And I have to say that for those growers who are affected, it feels like it's a lot more than that. But I think those numbers do give a reasonable idea of the impact that it has had. This year, for example, in the gold kiwifruit, we think probably it will reduce export receipts by upwards of $100 million just this coming year. And so that is significant.
Also, they say that in terms of job losses, up to 470 jobs a year between 2012 and 2015. What's that going to mean for people who aren't just growers, for example? What kind of impact are you expecting?
Oh, that's a huge impact, Genevieve, and it's a huge impact in the community. When you talk about those jobs, you're talking about full-time equivalents, but many of those jobs actually aren't full-time equivalents. They are actually part-time jobs, and so it's affecting more than 400 people in any 1 year. It's affecting many more than that, because a lot of those jobs are people depending on that part-time work to augment other income that they have. And so it'll have wide ripple effects right throughout the community because of that.
You're now looking for financial help. What do you think you need as a result of this report to get you back on your feet?
Look, the thing with PSA, the effect of it has been quite uneven in the Bay of Plenty. If you think about it in terms of tsunami, a tsunami hits, and those that are nearest to the origin or the epicenter, they get devastated. And that's what's happening in the Te Puke region. Those gold growers where the PSA was first discovered, for them, this has been a tsunami on their business. But the ripple effects obviously continue out and are continuing out even now. But for those growers, this is huge. This is absolutely huge, and they are going to need some help. There's no question they will need some financial help.
Okay, so let's talk financial help.
What we need right now is effectively an underwrite for growers. Many of those growers and I have to say, many of those growers are young growers. They are the future of the industry. They have quite a lot of debt.
What kind of debt? Let's talk about this realistically. What are we looking at?
Well, originally those orchards, before PSA hit in November of 2010, those orchards were worth of the order of $400,000 to $450,000 a hectare. Now they're at a bare land price of $70,000 a hectare. Now, if you're conservatively geared before PSA hit, you might have had $150,000 worth of debt on a $400,000 per hectare orchard. And so you weren't overgeared at all. But now those growers are in a situation where if they've lost their entire orchard because of PSA, they've got $150,000 of debt now, but the orchard's only worth $70,000.
Are the banks going to play ball?
I talked to a senior banker yesterday in one of the major banks, and they said they've been very encouraged by what the industry is doing and the recovery plan that we have in place.
You're very hopeful that this new gold variety, G3, is going to be the savior at some point, although there's going to be a bit of a lag. Apparently, though, Japanese consumers aren't so keen on the taste. How do you know G3 is going to stand up to the disease? How do you know consumers are going to like it?
This year, the G3 that's been grown, and there's around 800,000 trays approximately of G3 this year. I haven't seen the latest numbers, but of that sort of order. We think that the G3 we produce this year tastes fantastic.
If G3 doesn't work, if it doesn't stand up to the disease, what is the future for the kiwi fruit industry?
That doesn't bear thinking about, to be honest. Look, we're hopeful about G3. What we do know about G3 so far is that it has shown a great deal of tolerance, much more compared to Hort 16A. We know that Hort 16A, the current gold, does not work long term. But we think G3, and we're obviously monitoring that even as we speak. We're monitoring is happening by people who are going out into orchards where G3 has been grown, and they're checking G3 even as we speak. And so we're hopeful, and so far it's showing quite a degree of tolerance. There's still a lot we have to learn, but we are quite confident that at this point that we think G3 is a winner.
It's certainly going to cost you a lot more going forward too, isn't it? You're going to have new sprays, new management systems. It's going to be more expensive, not less.
Yes, that's true, Genevieve, but on the other side, one of the beauties of this new variety I've been really encouraged with, it's cheaper on a number of other angles. It's cheaper for growers to grow. It's more productive. In other words, you get greater production per hectare. And it's much cheaper to pack through the pack house. On
a human level, on an emotional level, what's it been like for growers? What have you seen? What are your colleagues telling you?
Well, I guess that's a hard one to know from how growers are feeling personally, but I know myself when I first heard about PSA and I knew what had happened in Italy, I felt sick to the pit of my stomach. And since I first heard of it, it's been a roller coaster ride, and I think it will be the same for all the other growers. This has been a roller coaster ride. There's been times when you've been filled with optimism, we can deal with this, we can beat this thing, and then other times you think, you know, where do we go from here? Right now, I think with the release of G3 and the recovery plan, I think there's a great deal of optimism. But it's still wait and see. As you've pointed out, we still have a lot to learn, and I think we're going to be waiting really for spring of this coming year just to see how this new G3 does work. But right now, growers are having to decide, do they graft to this new G3 variety or not? And so growers are having to make a huge decision this month and next month.
Thanks, Neil. Coming up after the break, get ready to learn a new word, Grexit. That's short for Greece exiting the euro. Repeat after me, Grexit. The Greek people take one step closer to the brink of a financial meltdown, and the whole world holds its breath. How to get the best deal out of your banker as the mortgage wars heat up. And courting China. Beijing's mayor and Auckland mayor Len Brown sign on the dotted line, and it's all about big bucks capital and investment. But first, answer this in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. What percentage of kiwi fruit export value derives from the Hort 16A gold variety? The answer when we return. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you what percentage of kiwi fruit export value derives from the Hort 16A gold variety. A whopping 30%. We're back now with Murray Weatherston, economist turned director of Financial Focus, and Tony Alexander, chief economist with the BNZ. And we're going to start overseas in Europe. Tony, you've just been over there. What's the latest? What's going on?
Yeah, it's not too flash over there, I think you'd have to say. I spent about 10 days in the rain in London, and then 2 or 3 days in Madrid, and then a couple of days in Paris. And definitely the feeling on the ground over there is that there is worse to come, as it were. Economically, the region is weak. Some economies are undergoing economic restructuring. For others, it's concentrated on banking sector problems. For many of them, it's governments trying to raise taxes, cut spending, etc. And because all of these things are melding together in an environment environment of still falling house prices, etc., it makes it very, very difficult to make forward progress, as it were. And what I've been interested in particular for the past 2 years, has been at what point will you get people just pulling back from the reform and voting for the electoral extremities? And that is what the Greek election gave us a couple of weeks ago.
Correct. And in fact, we hear today, Murray, that that the Greek politicians cannot do a deal. They're going back to the poll in June. Everybody is saying, what the heck's going to happen to the euro in the Greek economy? Your take on it?
Well, I think inevitably Greece will be either asked to exit or will have to exit. Exit themselves. One of the big imponderables is what happens if the next Greek election comes up with a hung jury once again. It's pretty clear the Greek people don't really have the stomach for the austerity that they're going to have, and I personally think they'll exit.
What will it mean for the Greek people, first of all, if they do exit the euro? What's going to happen to them, Tony?
Yeah, big question. I mean, first of all, everyone's going to try and get their existing euros out of Greece and put them in a bank in Germany, predominantly.
And we're already seeing runs on banks, correct?
Yep, most definitely. 30% at least of the deposit base for Greece is shot through. Spain is also losing some deposits as well. And this is a key thing, putting aside the Greek people for the moment, the contagion effect. We can't actually talk only about what will happen in Greece, because as soon as it happens there, the investors will go, well, I wonder what the Portuguese are thinking. I wonder if the Irish would like their package renegotiated. What about Spain and Italy? So that contagion effect is massive. But just Greece itself, you'll be looking, I think, at a lot more unemployment, and the litigation could go on for years, because the common estimate coming out of Europe is that the cost to outside parties of them exiting the euro could be 500 billion euro of losses, as it were, because Greece's going to try and repay drachma instead of euro. You
know what worries me? Greece is a relatively tiny economy.
Sure.
And yet look at the effect it's going to have on the world. What do you predict might happen, and how is it going to affect us here at home?
Well, clearly the markets in the short term are quite unsettled with the announcement today that the Greeks haven't been able to reach a conclusion. I think world markets will be in a complete state of uncertainty until something definite happens, and it may be like the Greek catharsis. We actually need something to purge the system of the Greek problem, and then maybe we'll start moving on again.
I wonder if it's an omen. France's new leader was in a plane heading over to talk to Angela Merkel, and it was struck by lightning. He had to go home. You read anything into that?
Yeah, maybe something from a religious point of view, most definitely. I think a key thing to take on board here is that we've sort of been here before in terms of things are spiralling downward in Europe, but then they stop the rot. There's a bit of an agreement reached of some regard, and we see some strength returns to the markets. Now, although I saw things pretty depressed across there where I went to, I did not get the feeling that we're looking at a repeat of late 2008, 09, of Great Depression talk, anything like that. Not with China still growing, 8% or so, America about 2.5%. You're not looking at a repeat of the Lehman situation. Now, that becomes important from a currency point of view, because it means that while in the short term the Kiwi dollar could easily get weaker, we're not necessarily going to stay down at low levels for the rest of this year. Once this settles down at some point, then we'll find, I think, the Kiwi dollar go back up again.
But I think the question is, when does it settle down? I mean, you can say they've put a Band-Aid on it 6 months ago, they put another Band-Aid on it 3 months ago, they may put another Band-Aid on it now. But until you actually fix the problem, and I'm not actually sure how it's fixed, short of Greek default, Greece defaulting and the creditors of Greece just having to take a haircut.
Let's talk about interest rates here at home. A great time to be a mortgage holder, isn't it? How low is it going? What's going on?
Well, Tony probably knows this better than I am, because he's right in there, but he's probably not allowed to talk about it.
He's going to have to talk about it, because I want to find out for our viewers, how do you get the best deal from your bankers right now? Yeah. Competition is fierce.
Oh, that's right. Competition has always been fierce in banking. They're basically faced with the same cost of deposits. The market is very, very competitive in terms of borrowers. People aren't scared of going to their own bank and saying, hey, the bank down the road will offer me 5.25%. You're wanting to charge me 5.75. What are you going to do about it? And street talk certainly suggests that when push comes to shove, most banks will fold and meet the competition.
How can banks at this point in time, if it costs so much money to borrow overseas now, how can they afford to give their customers a break? What's the catch? Is it just clever marketing to hook them in?
Okay, first of all, there is not some mega billion pile of money sitting there to be lent out, as some people are saying in the media. That's not the case at all. What this is driven by is simply a fall in the cost of money that we are borrowing for the short time periods. You'll have noticed that the likes of 3-year fixed interest rates haven't come down, but it's the short-term rates have come down because the markets have started to price in a chance that we get a cut in interest rates in New Zealand. Now, my view is that probably will not happen. We're looking at the New Zealand economy with increasing economic activity coming from rebuilding of Christchurch at some stage. Many incomes, not all, but many incomes in the farming sector are fine. Residential construction in Auckland picking up. So if I was there as a Reserve Bank governor, I wouldn't be looking at an economy which necessarily needed an extra interest rate kick from easing monetary policy. And so that feeds into the general commentary just appearing right now of maybe these rates don't go much lower. Maybe you do want to take a bit of a mixture of floating and fixed at this point.
If it's good news for people borrowing money, what about people that have deposits in the bank? It ain't great for the savers, is it?
No, it's terrible news. You know, interest rates are a two-edged sword. What one person pays, the other person receives. And if the bank's cost of funds is down, that means savers are getting lower interest rates than what they were before. So people, you know, the older people who are relying on their income to pay their bills over and above the pension, they're suffering huge falls in income.
The interesting thing here, of course, for depositors, investors, is with the interest rates so low, it makes some alternative investments look attractive, even equities, share market maybe. But again, on the housing market, lots of young buyers coming through, the interest rates are low, it gives extra support for the housing market and house prices as well, it has to be said.
Yeah, but all the talk, that the Governor of the Reserve Bank might come out and say there has to be a minimum deposit is going to, hurt it. I mean, the problem for most people these days with house prices where they are is actually raising the deposit in the first place.
Yep. I can't see the Reserve Bank Governor do that because the impact will fall disproportionately upon the young people. And of course, if it looked like that was seriously going to happen, the message would be go and buy your house right now before he does it. So I actually don't think that was a kite in the wind. I don't think it's actually going to happen, that deposit scheme.
Thanks, gentlemen. Coming up after the break, future-proof on the highways and byways of the economic world as our 3 experts point out what's coming up. But first, answer this in our Farmers' Facts and Figures quiz. Where in New Zealand has the kiwifruit disease, PSAV, been discovered? The answer when we return. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, where in New Zealand has a kiwifruit disease, PSAV, been discovered since it first appeared in November 2010? Te Puke, Bay of Plenty, and Franklin, South Auckland, affecting 1,141 orchards as of March this year. And now it's time for Future Proof. And Neil, welcome back. We were talking about interest rates, the low interest rates. You think they're great for the productive sector. Tell me more.
Interest rates are great for the productive sector because it makes the cost of funding new development just that much cheaper. And I think that's key for us going forward. If we're going to develop, and the industry is going to need to redevelop once we get through PSA, we need those low interests to help fund that development. And in the end, what you're doing, you're actually funding export dollars, and that's what New Zealand needs, is export dollars.
The City of Auckland has now done a deal following a trade mission over to China with the City of Beijing, an agreement of cooperation, looking at finding some capital for, their city rail, for example, among other things. They're talking about billions of dollars. Is that good for us or bad for us? Tony?
Well, it's good that there is a source of capital potentially available, but then there's a source of capital available for purchasing dairying land in New Zealand, and the reaction wasn't necessarily all that positive. And of course, if you're going to be bringing capital in or borrowing money, it's a matter of servicing it. So I don't read that agreement as necessarily something that's going to massively drive forward Auckland or anywhere else in the near future. These things are made all the time, especially between the Chinese and cities overseas, and they basically say, we're going to talk nicely to each other over the next while.
So you think it's a paper tiger?
I don't know about paper tiger. It's moving in the right direction, and it's keeping the communication and the relationship going, and that's what matters when you're dealing with the Chinese, building up a good, trustworthy relationship over an extended period of time. So it's positive.
Speaking of the Chinese, 24% of all their exports go to Europe. The Greek crisis now on. What's that going to mean for the fallout, do you think, for the world economy, Murray?
Well, the Chinese economy has been sort of the driver for the rest of the world. I mean, Australia's done extremely well out of their mining exports into China. America's done well with their businesses owning things in China as well. The Chinese growth, when they talk it slowing down, we would love to have the rates that it's slowing down to. I mean, if it slows from 9 to 8, what would the New Zealand people give for an 8% growth rate? I think it would be a much bigger thing for China if America was to slow down than for Europe to slow down.
Here at home, of course, next week we have John Key's latest budget, the zero budget. What are you expecting, Tony?
Well, the thing is, of course, these days, and in fact, since back to Ruth Richardson, most of what's going to be in a budget is already announced well ahead of the event. Definite effort to try and downplay the significance. And we've already seen welfare reforms coming through, extra labour market reform coming through. And really the main thing we look for in the budget is just, do the numbers add up? Do the economic forecasts look reasonable? And I have to say, given the way so many of us have overestimated growth in our economy in the past few years, the risk is that Treasury's numbers are probably over-optimistic and there could be negative economic surprises. And so when the government's going to achieve or return to surplus could be pushed out a bit. If Bill English is painting things cautiously, he may just push the surplus out by a year.
One of the things that farmers and growers will be hoping for is $400 million plus in the budget for irrigation schemes. What would that mean to growers like you?
Yeah, irrigation is obviously extremely important for the horticulture industry, but we do use it efficiently. We're a very efficient user of that irrigation, but yes, any money that helps develop new land and bring new land into production will certainly help growers and we think helps New Zealand Inc.
The problem is, of course, the government still hasn't come to grips with the allocation and the storage of water, have they? It seems like putting the cart before the horse.
It's interesting in a country like New Zealand that we have so much water, and already we're finding that we're having these competing interests, all competing for the same quantity of water, and that's happening right throughout New Zealand.
From a report card point of view, how do you think the key government is doing from an economic point of view? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being wonderful, 1 being terrible.
They're probably 6 or 7.
What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I'd give exactly the same number.
Okay, what's coming up for you, gentlemen? You're off to Sydney to an economic conference, I understand.
That's right. Tomorrow morning I head off to have a couple of days of listening to fund managers talking about their views of the world. Be interesting to see if it's any different than the view that we already have. What
do you suspect you're going to hear? Do you think there are going to be any big surprises for any of you?
No. I think in today's world, information is so freely available, and basically we're all reading the same information basically at the same time. I mean, almost nobody has an advantage over anybody else now. If something happens, if something was to happen right now, probably within 2 or 3 minutes, it would be, if it was important, it would be known everywhere.
Is Germany's Angela Merkel going to buckle? Is she going to give the Greeks what they want, or is she going to have to hang tough because otherwise everybody else is going to have their begging bowls out? Tony?
She is going to back away to some extent. Her party just suffered a fairly substantial loss in a local election over there. She's made her position reasonably clear, but in order to preserve what they can of the euro, if not the European Union overall, she's going to, like all politicians, you always have to give some ground. It's a matter of how much, what do you get in exchange for that? And that's sort of what all this positioning is about. But it could take quite a lot longer, quite a number of weeks, because we're probably looking at another Greek election in a month's time.
So don't touch that dial. We'll see what happens, gentlemen.
Can I just make one comment? And this is about Europe, because Europe is just so important to the kiwifruit industry as a market, because over 50% of our crop gets sold into Europe. And so as growers, we're extremely concerned about what's happening in Europe and developments. In recent years, of course, we've really tried to develop markets, or Zespri has tried to develop markets into Asia, and particularly China. And so they're becoming increasingly important. But we are still very dependent on Europe. And if there's a real economic meltdown, then that's not obviously good news for growers. And so growers are watching that very closely.
Thanks to my guests, Murray Weatherston, Tony Alexander, and Neil Trebilco. Be sure to check out our website at country99tv.co.nz for fantastic rural information. Meantime, multitasking is the curse of the modern age, no doubt about it. Amazing just how much you can accomplish at one time when you set your mind to it.
New stunt, new stunt. We call this one the 50 Cent. You know, bench pressing the weights while doing a wheelie. Wing 1100 activate. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Keep the faith. See you next time.